Hey guys, I'm Urizi. This story is all about what if Naruto turns into a fox during a full moon. Pre-timescope, no Biju, Konoha is a village of ninjas who hunt demons. Naruto is a ninja with secrets. And tonight is the night of a full moon. Before we proceed with the story, please like and subscribe to this channel if you liked the video, and don't forget to check the description for the other works of the author if you liked the story. Let's start. Chapter 37, Explode. Yudai sat cross-legged on a remote stretch of beach. Across the sea, just over the horizon, lay Uzunokuni. He should return to report directly to his father and grandfather about his delivery to Orochimaru, even though he'd already sent a letter, but he kept on putting it off. As much as he loved his family, he felt no need to hurry home when there was no reason to. Uzushiagakuer no Sato was a small village. But after a few centuries of steady population growth, it was starting to burst at the seams. Houses had been added onto so much that they became attached to the neighboring buildings, creating sprawling residences that contained dozens of families in some areas. Foxes lived on top of each other, and tripped over each other, and there was just no room. The council had been debating what to do about this problem for a good 3 decades. Should they try to found a civilian counterpart to their village for all the kitsune that weren't fighters? Should they try to acquire more land around the current village walls and simply expand the current settlement? Should they secretly send colonists to start a new hidden settlement in some hidden place in another country? No one could agree. Soon it won't matter, Yudai thought. We'll conquer Konoha and move into the rich lands of Fire Country. Space won't be a problem, nor will there be any need for secrecy. Things will probably be more difficult once our existence is revealed, but with more room to hide. The hoarse caw of a crow Tengu interrupted Yudai's musings. He glanced up at the sky as the ugly black demon practically fell out of the air in front of him. The short feathery creature was heaving with exhaustion, and it thrust a message scroll at him, almost hitting his face with it. Important. It croaked. Important, he said. Read, read. Yudai grimaced and took the scroll while one of his shadow escorts slipped out of the cover of the trees to see to the Tengu's payment. Still sitting on the beach sand, he unrolled the scroll. It didn't take long to read it, and the message had him grinding his teeth. Uzumaki Kushina in Konoha and seeking her old position. She has made threats against me. Please advise. Kashoku. That should not be possible. She was bound to the village. If she had left for Konoha, someone would know. There was no way that the Uzumaki would have sent her back to the place where she had disgraced them. There was no way that the Uzumaki would break the rules and send an ambassador that hadn't been approved by the other 9 clans. Clan Uzumaki was too chained down by their precious honor to send a representative behind the village's back the way that the Kurohi had done. He slowly rolled the scroll back up and passed it off to his other shadow companion with instructions to get it to his father immediately, and then glared back inland in the general direction of the Leaf Village. What a vexation you are, Kushina, he thought darkly, allowing one of his 6 tails into existence so that its bristled state could highlight his anger. I'd like to keep you as my pet and to preserve the unique power of your blood from its inevitable extinction. But if you get in the way, you will be eliminated. Hinata really wasn't sure what to do with herself. It was Sunday and Kurenye-sensei had given them the whole day off. If Shino was training, it was with his father. Kiba was at home with Akamaru. And Kurenye-sensei had gone out to meet a friend. Take the day off, Hinata, Kurenye-sensei had said at breakfast. Read a book, go out with friends, do whatever you like. We'll get back to training tomorrow. She thought about training, but there was no training with the Hyuga scheduled for today, and she wasn't sure that Kurenye-sensei would approve. She thought about cleaning Kurenye-sensei's house, except she'd managed to clean pretty much everything fairly thoroughly since arriving in her teacher's home. She thought about shopping, however there was no need for groceries and she had all the ninja supplies that she required. So far she'd passed the time by cleaning the breakfast dishes. Then she'd looked for any dusty places or cobwebs that she'd somehow missed before. And now, she was out of ideas. What should I do? There were no friends to go out with. She's been very sheltered as a child and never really developed the social skills to make friends. In the academy she hadn't spoken much with the other girls, they were all so enamored with Uchiha Sasuke and she'd never really understood why. The closest things she had to friends were her teammates, and she wasn't about to bother them on their day off. Should I read a book? She had no books, not any books that would be for pleasure reading. She didn't think her sensei would be happy if she studied texts on the ninja arts on her day off. That meant that she would have to visit the library. The Hyuga girl frowned very slightly as she considered whether or not she should go. The startled yowl of a cat from somewhere outside distracted her from her internal debate. And then one of the neighbor's dogs started frantically barking. Hinata slipped out of Kurenye-sensei's house and into the backyard to see if there was anything going on. She thought about briefly activating her Byakugan to better look. The dense hedges that ringed Kurenye-sensei's yard shook violently before something burst from them. Hinata reacted instinctively as the blur raced towards her. She sidestepped its charge and jabbed at it with a chakra strike as it passed her. Hrarg! Whatever it was skidded sideways and rolled a few times from the force and suddenness of her unexpected blow before coming to a stop, and revealed itself to be a boy. He had messy blonde hair and was dressed in green pajama pants and a gray shirt. He lay still in the grass and he looked soaking wet. The sight of him immediately sent a rush of panic through her veins. She'd attacked a boy. What if he was just playing? Running from a friend or a sibling with a hose or a water balloon. She'd hurt him for no reason. Hinata choked, her hands rising to cover her mouth. The boy moved. Just a twitch. A curl of his hand. And then he rolled to his hands and feet like an animal, regarding her with inhuman eyes. They were like a cat's eyes, vertically slit pupils with irises that were a swirling mix of red and blue. They darted around, from her face, to the left, to her face, to the right, and back to her face. She couldn't tell if there was anger in his eyes or fear. The cat-eyed boy crouched 6 feet from her, tense and still. There were dark marks on his cheeks like stripes along with a few bleeding cuts, and his lips were slightly snarled, revealing the tips of fangs. A hint of bandages were visible poking out of his shirt collar. His ears looked overly long and pointed, and they were a bit furry. The only sound as they stood there, staring at each other, was the barking dog chained in a neighbor's yard several houses away. A corner of her mind wondered what he was while the rest of her sat numb with shock. He looked mostly human. He was dressed like a human. But he wasn't acting like a human. His odd traits could belong to a dozen different kinds of demons, yet he didn't really match any of them very well. I am sorry, she squeaked finally, surprising herself. You startled me. But you shouldn't run through other people's yards like that. The boy blinked, and then his brow creased in confusion. The red swirls in his eyes faded, leaving only blue. He rocked back on his heels, tilted his head, and stared intently at her. Hey, it's you, he said slowly, as if with some effort. What's your name again? Hyuga Hinata, she responded automatically. His voice was familiar. His hair seemed familiar, although it was wet and plastered to his head. And he recognized her, or thought that he did. Oh right. He muttered and his focus started to drift. He looked away from her, his eyes darting around again like he was frantically seeking something or thinking very hard. One hand starting plucking blades of grass, showing that he had claws for fingernails, and there were more bleeding scratches she noticed. He said nothing and didn't share his name. Flickers of red started sparking through his irises again. And your name is? Hinata squeaked. The boy flinched and his feral eyes snapped back to hers. Why your name? She whimpered. Naruto, he answered. Hinata blinked. Naruto-san. He had the blonde hair, and his eyes were blue. But he lacked his signature orange. And the strange animal features distorted his face. Naruto-san, why are you all wet? The boy frowned and looked down at his shirt. He pulled the damp fabric away from his skin in puzzlement. It seemed to Hinata that he hadn't even realized that he was soaked through. I don't know. And then he noticed the cuts on his hands. I'm bleeding. Naruto-san, and maybe you should end your jutsu, Hinata suggested. That was the only thing that could explain his altered appearance. Kiba's clan jutsu could make him more like a beast, and Naruto had to have something similar, perhaps a technique that made the caster cat-like instead of dog-like. And maybe the jutsu had mental side effects for those who hadn't mastered its use, which could explain why Naruto kept spacing out. Or maybe he had a concussion. Whatever it was, he should stop it and return to normal. Jutsu? The blonde boy repeated blankly. What jutsu? The jutsu that's transformed you, she said. Naruto blinked and looked down at his hands again and this time noticed his claws. He ran his fingers over his face and tugged at his pointed ears. And then she saw him run his tongue over his teeth and feel the fangs. Oh, yeah, I'll fix this. The boy closed his eyes and made a show of concentrating, however instead of the animal features fading away they intensified. His ears grew longer, furrier, and darker so that they looked black. There was the sound of ripping seams and Hinata could see a yellow, bushy, tail. Naruto-san, I don't think it's working, Hinata gulped. It's not. Naruto stood up, and Hinata saw that he wasn't wearing any shoes and his feet were as scratched as his hands, and clumsily spun in a circle to see his tail. Crap. Seeing his ears and tail, Hinata revised her thoughts of him from cat-like to fox-like. If the whole situation wasn't beyond bizarre, she would have found his appearance rather cute. But even though she didn't know Naruto very well she could tell that he was not acting right. Naruto-san, are you alright? She asked, fidgeting with her fingers. Did you hurt your head? No, I don't think. He was looking around frantically again. I need to get going. I need to find my mom. Hinata bit her lip. Naruto was an orphan. He had no mother anymore. He definitely had to have some sort of concussion. He couldn't control his jutsu and the things he was saying weren't making sense. Wait, please come inside. She walked up to him and timidly grabbed his wrist, and felt that he was trembling. You're bleeding. You need to have your cuts cleaned. I need to find my mom. Naruto insisted, narrowing his animal eyes at her suspiciously. Let go of me whatever your name is. Do you know where your mother is? Hinata asked, cringing away from his aggressive look. He scanned his surroundings in frantic confusion. Where am I? Kurenye-sensei's backyard, she replied. Naruto didn't seem to understand her answer so she gave him the street address, but that only seemed to confuse him more. Where am I? The boy demanded in a strained voice, his breath coming in gasps. I need to find where's my mom. Naruto-san, Hinata murmured, hesitantly tugging at the boy's wrist. Please come inside. When Kurenye-sensei comes back she can help you find your mother. As strange and unnerving as Naruto's behavior was, she wanted to help him. He seemed to be a nice boy and he'd tried to defend her against Neji's painful truths during their match. If she could get him indoors, treat his cuts, and keep him calm until Kurenye-sensei returned from visiting her friend, everything would work out. I can't wait. Naruto snarled, the red again rising in his eyes. Let go. No, she squeaked feebly, keeping her grip on his wrist. Please. He bared his teeth and raised his free hand like he was going to claw her face and Hinata froze. He's not going to. Mangetsu crouched underneath the broken window and studied the glass. There were traces of blood, but not a lot so Naruto hadn't done more than superficial damage to himself. Loosening his mask a bit, he picked up the boy's trail. He was best at scent tracking as a wolf. As a human he could still do it, although any Inuzuka would be able to outperform him easily. With his umbu mask on, it was even harder to smell. But the trail was very fresh, and Naruto hadn't left the house since being brought there, so his scent stood out. He's starting to smell rather foxish. The umbu followed Naruto's path through a good dozen backyards. The boy had vaulted over wooden fences and burst through hedges. Somewhere up ahead a dog was barking frantically. Intruder! I saw you! Intruder! I'll get you! I bite! Intruder, intruder, intruder! If Naruto is looking for Kushina, he thought as he skulked towards the upset dog, he's running the wrong way. Mangetsu slipped past the dog, which was chained to the back of its house, and then entered a yard with a koi pond. It was a very large and elaborate koi pond that was also surrounded by a rock garden. And Naruto's scent dead-ended in the water. For a second, he panicked and thought that the boy had drowned. But the artificial pool was much too shallow for any body, even a child's, to be swallowed up by the water. Then he spied a stretch of damp rocks on the far side of the pond and hurried to pick up Naruto's much diluted trail again. With Naruto's scent much weaker, Mangetsu had to go slower and keep his eyes sharp for visual clues as to the boy's direction. So far he'd gone in a fairly straight line, but he couldn't just assume that Naruto would just run one way without making any turns. Mangetsu would follow the trail and find his son. Just because this was a residential area with few ninja around didn't mean that it was safe for Naruto to run around in his state. The boy was very upset and probably shifting towards a beast. It was frightening the local pets, and if he ran into any of the neighbors it would erase the secrecy of his location. The Umbu peeked over the hedges of the second to last house before the corner of the block. Naruto was half transformed with furry ears and a tail that had burst through the seat of his pajama pants. There was a child his age with dark, short hair and pale skin standing near him and touching his wrist. The other child wasn't being aggressive at all, but Naruto raised a clawed hand to strike at them. Mangetsu was over the bushes and at his son's side in a fraction of a second, stopping the blow before Naruto did any damage that he would regret later. Aombu-san. The other child, a girl, yelped and stumbled backwards, letting go of Naruto's wrist. As soon as she was detached from his boy, he activated his Hiraishin and brought them to Naruto's room. Naruto wobbled from the sudden disorientation and looked around frantically, like a cornered animal. Mangetsu took advantage of his brief distraction to shut the bedroom door to hopefully keep the damage to a minimum. "Did you really have to jump through the window?" he asked as he sealed the door shut and headed over to the window to reinforce it. I had to get out, There was a horrible animal growl behind Mangetsu as he worked to ensure that Naruto wouldn't be able to leap through the glass. "You?" "Yes." Just as he finished and turned to face his son, there was an impact to his back. Naruto was clawing and striking at him, but he mostly just hit his Umbu armor and he moved out of the boy's range before he could bother to aim his attacks. He dodged Naruto's wild lunges with ease, even in the small room, and waited for the boy to wear himself out. And then Naruto set his hands on fire and tried to slap him with the blue flames. "Okay," he thought as Naruto started leaving scorch marks on the floor and walls, "this is enough." With a tiny burst of speed, he got behind the half-transformed boy and gripped the back of his neck. Forcing a small burst of chakra through his system, he stunned Naruto into a temporary paralysis. The boy flopped to the floor and the blue flames shrouding his hands sputtered out. "You need to calm down," Mangetsu said and dragged Naruto over to his mattress. "You could ranger yourself." He tried to remove the boy's soaked clothing, but Naruto made feeble attempts to bite him. The boy's Vulpin eyes had turned red, a trait probably inherited from his mother, as werewolf eyes always stayed the same color, and snarled and panted like a furious puppy. Mangetsu got Naruto down to his underwear before the boy found his voice again. "It's you, isn't it?" Naruto hissed, pinning back his furry fox ears. "You're him." Mangetsu checked the fox boy over for injuries as he knelt by the mattress. His scratches from the window glass were indeed superficial, and with his shape-shifting he'd healed them all over. And his previous injuries hadn't been reopened and fortunately had even healed further, allowing for most of the bandages to be removed. "Take off your mask," Naruto shrilly demanded, every bit of hair standing on end. "It's always polite to say please," he responded, but did as the boy wanted. Naruto stared at his unveiled face. The red in his irises darkened. His agitation spiked his chakra, which boosted his healing abilities, which in turn allowed him to shake off his paralysis faster. The boy staggered to his feet and shoved his chest. "Go away," he snapped, breathing heavily, fox tail raised and bristling. "I hate you." "I know," Minato nodded and attached the wolf mask to his belt. "You made me a freak and ruined my life. They treated me and Mom like garbage because of you. They threw me away and nobody wanted me and I was always so afraid, and it's all your fault, Dateba yo. I hate you, I hate you, I." Minato put his hand on Naruto's damp head, interrupting the boy's rant as the fox child flopped into a sitting position on the bed. "I know that you hate me," he said with a sad smile. "I expected you to if you inherited my curse. You're supposed to be a dumb wolf now," Naruto scowled. "If you could turn back into a man, why didn't you come back? Why did you leave Mom? She needed you." For a long time I didn't know that I could, Minato replied, removing his hand from his son's head. And by the time I found out that I could, Kushina had already returned to her native land and had you. There was no way I could have done any good if I came back. How do you know? Naruto barked. You didn't try. I couldn't follow her to Uzushio, Minato said. Foreigners aren't allowed in. If I appeared there it would have only done damage. And if she hadn't stayed in Konoha it would be no better. The Uchiha would have probably started a civil war over my presence and tried to assassinate me whenever they could. That would have put you and your mother in danger. As far as I knew, it was best for me to just disappear. You and your mother would be away from my infamous shadow. And if you escaped my curse, you would be safe without me. Minato shifted back on his heels and sighed. I thought that if you inherited the curse from me that you would be killed by the Uchiha or some other clan with similar views, so I never thought to look for you anywhere. And even if I had found you, up until very recently I was homeless and penniless, wandering the land and depending on the charity of others to get nice things like clothes. Although, after hearing about some of the places that you've been, perhaps you would have been better off out in the woods with me living off rabbits, fish, and pigeons. Naruto just stared back at him warily. He didn't look like he was accepting anything that Minato had said, but he wasn't yelling about it anymore. Perhaps he hadn't found a new point of attack yet. Watching him sit there on the bed, Minato was reminded of a puppy. Even when a puppy was trying to be fierce it still retained its cuteness. And although Naruto had red eyes and black strips on his cheeks he still looked sort of adorable. Perhaps it was his tail and ears and his small stature, and the fact that his angry expression looked almost like pouting. What are you smiling about? I'm happy, Minato replied. Why? Naruto demanded. What's there for you to be happy about? I've waited a very long time to meet you, Naruto, he answered. Why wouldn't I be happy? Naruto's angry face melted into one of confusion. But, I hate you. I know. Minato ruffled Naruto's damp hair and stood up. I'm going to clean up the glass now. No more jumping through windows, okay? Naruto didn't answer, he just slithered under his sheets and curled up into a silent ball. Taking the silence as agreement, Minato slipped out of the bedroom and went to fetch the broom and dustpan. What a mess, he thought, with more than the shards of glass on the floor in mind. Naruto curled up into a ball under the cover his sheets and hugged his tail the way that he'd done as a small child. He felt tired, damp, and achy from his blind dash away from the house. And there were knots in his insides that only made him feel worse. He still wanted to go find his mother, but he didn't know where he was in the village and he didn't know where she was, so there was no point in trying to run away again. He'd only get lost and get in trouble. His mom would come and see him if he stayed put and waited. What a weirdo. I'd be upset if someone that I wanted to like me hated me. How could he smile? Chapter 38, Bloody Habanero. Sasuke wanted to run but Ino wouldn't let go of his arm. He couldn't just hit her, they weren't practice fighting on a training field. Sakura could have been more helpful, but instead of getting into one of the fights with Ino that she used to when he was involved she just made verbal demands of her blonde comrade that were ignored. Daddy! Can we invite Sasuke-kun over for dinner? No thank you, Sasuke muttered, torn between keeping up his usual indifferent expression and begging Ino's father for rescue with his eyes. Ino pig! Sakura raged. Let go of his arm. Again her demand went unheeded. Ino, honey. Mr. Yamanaka began hesitantly while his two pals Mr. Nara and Mr. Akimichi looked on in amusement. That's your daughter. A woman snorted. Sasuke blinked and glanced over at a red-haired woman he hadn't noticed before. Akimichi, Nara, and Yamanaka formed a solid trio and they rarely were seen with anyone else. So he'd thought that the woman had just been some bystander eating mochi, not worth his attention. As he took in her distinctive red hair, blue-gray eyes, and her facial features a cool feeling rushed down his spine. Hey, she looks like... Yes, Mr. Yamanaka nodded. Ino's my girl. No way. The woman howled with laughter. You? A daughter? That's too perfect. Ah ha ha ha. Naruto's mother? What's so funny? Ino demanded hotly, yanking Sasuke's arm in her outrage. Oh. The woman gasped, rubbing at her tearing eyes before leaning in close to study Ino's face. You're such a pretty girl. You'll be really beautiful when you grow up, Ino-chan, she chuckled and threw a glance back at Mr. Yamanaka. The boys are going to love you. Thank you. Ino smiled, pleased but wary. You're an evil bitch, Kushina, Mr. Yamanaka grunted with a sour expression. Quit flirting with me, Inoichi. The woman snickered. You're married. I miss Minato, Ino's father complained. He could make you behave. The redhead's broad smile vanished into a look of grief. I miss him, too. The air suddenly became distinctly uncomfortable. The adults knew what was going on. But Sasuke felt as lost as the girls looked. How does your foot taste, Inoichi? Mr. Nara inquired. Shut up, Mr. Yamanaka grunted. I know we've said it before, but we're all very sorry about what happened, Mr. Akimichi said, putting one of his beefy hands on the woman's shoulder. Did he die? Ino asked. No, her father said to her. Worse. A howler took him. It was slaying. A howler killed him meant that a werewolf had killed the man in question. A howler bit him meant a werewolf bite and catching the curse. And, a howler took him meant that the man had succumbed to the curse and become a full-blown werewolf. Oh. Ino gasped and squeezed Sasuke's arm again. Let go, Sasuke muttered. I'm starting to lose feeling. That's awful, Sakura swallowed, hugging her library books tighter to her chest. Yeah, the woman a foreigner according to her Hitayate agreed with a grimace that she tried to force into a smile. It was a real rotten situation. Now let go of that poor boy before his arm falls off. When Ino failed to immediately respond to her command, Kushina physically started prying the girl's fingers off Sasuke's abused arm. Wahey! Ino squealed. Is he your boyfriend? Kushina asked. No, Sasuke hurriedly answered, backing away from the girl as soon as his arm was free and massaging at the abused flesh. Well, that's not a way to make him your boyfriend, Kushina snorted. That's a way to make him never be your boyfriend. Ino scowled at the woman and brushed the bangs from her eyes. I'm just trying to give Sasuke-kun the opportunity to have a nice home-cooked meal since there's no way that a bachelor like Kakashi-sensei will bother with anything more complicated than frozen dinners. Oh, you're that Sasuke, the red-haired woman said. He felt himself wilting under her scrutiny. There was little doubt in his mind now that she was the woman from the photograph that Naruto had claimed to be his mother. She had the same red hair, the same blue-gray eyes, the same swirl on her Hitayate. And her wild personality reminded him of Naruto's goofy idiocy. Having her there in the flesh, real, and staring at him made a dozen half-remembered nightmares where she strangled him to death over betraying Naruto somehow flew through his brain. She seemed to decide something and waved back at the other adults. It's been nice talking to you guys, I'll see you around. She snagged Sasuke by the back of his shirt and dragged him off in a way only slightly kinder than Ino's. You come with me? Panic slithered through his veins as he stumbled alongside Naruto's mother. He couldn't help but think of the awesome display he'd seen at the training grounds the day that she had supposedly arrived and learned what had happened to Naruto. And he had a horrible sinking feeling that somehow, someway she'd found out that he'd told his father about Naruto having her picture and how that had maybe given his father the idea to stab her son. That's the price of being good-looking, she remarked once Ino, Sakura, and the adult Inoshikacho trio were out of sight. Pretty girls are going to be after you until you're taken, and sometimes even then. Sucks, doesn't it? Yeah, Sasuke warily agreed, trying to sound normal. So, you're Mikato's other little boy, the woman drawled, watching him from the corner of her eye. She's really broken up over what the clan did to you, you know. That's what Itachi said, Sasuke replied. She threw some food wrapper and napkin into a trash can, steered him onto a deserted side street, and stopped. Do you know who I am? You're Naruto's mother, he said. Yes, that would be me Uzumaki Kushina. She tilted her head, giving him a sharp look. Are you afraid of me? Well. Sasuke hesitated, considering his answer carefully. Kakashi-sensei seems wary of you, and I saw some of the damage you did to that training ground a few days ago. You did you? She pursed her lips and then sighed. Your dad should be glad to be in prison where I can't touch him, but I know he isn't because he thinks I'm a loser. If he didn't have that demmed cherry on to read my moves I could totally fold him into a pretzel, date bonnet. Oh well. Sasuke watched her anxiously, struggling not to fidget as he waited to see just what this was about. I know you weren't there with those jerks that had the knives and stabbed Naruto, she remarked. You'd either be in prison with your dad, or you'd be dead. So, did you tell your father anything about Naruto knowing that he would use it to kill him? No. Sasuke denied, surprising himself a bit with how sharp his tone was. The red-haired Kunoichi searched his face before nodding with satisfaction. Good, I don't think I'll have a problem with you. She flashed him a crooked smile. So relax. And kick butt in the last part of the trials. Make those Uchiha regret that they kicked you out of their exclusive little club. Sasuke swallowed hard and shoved his fists into his pockets. Hey, if you really want to piss them off, have them announce your name as Hatake Sasuke when you go to fight the demons they've picked out for you, she suggested with an almost childish sort of glee. That'll really get them frothing at the mouth. I'd rather not, the boy muttered. It was just an idea, she shrugged and ruffled his hair. Sasuke frowned and fixed what she'd done. So, you know my mother? He asked. Yeah, she's an old buddy of mine. Naruto's mother grinned. We were excited to be having kids near the same time. Perhaps if things had been different, you and Naruto would have been childhood pals. A new sort of guilt wormed its way into Sasuke's guts. Now his mother had another thing to be upset over. His father had attacked someone who under different circumstances would have been a family friend, not that Naruto would have been Sasuke's personal friend, probably just an acquaintance at best. Naruto is getting better every day, if you were curious, the redhead continued. I won't make you be his friend if you really don't like him, but don't give him a hard time or take out your frustrations on him, alright? Sasuke nodded stiffly. Okay, she winked at him and walked off. I'll be seeing you around. He watched her stride off in silence. When he was alone he turned and wandered off in some other direction, not caring where he was going. Eventually he found his way to a park and up a tree. Once he found a good branch he settled in there, leaned his head onto one knee, and closed his eyes. Everything's such a mixed-up mess, what next? Hinata wrung her hands as she walked the village streets. After the bizarre encounter with Naruto and the mysterious Umbunin who'd spirited him away, she'd sat in the backyard frozen with shock for a good stretch of minutes. Now she was searching for Kurenye-sensei and the guidance she would provide. The girl chewed at her lip so much that it would have to start bleeding soon. Surely the Umbunin would make sure that Naruto got the medical treatment that he clearly needed. But she needed to hear that reassurance from her sensei. And perhaps her Jonin mentor would have some idea of what sort of jutsu that Naruto had been using. As she reached a busier part of the village, Hinata gathered her nerve and started the hand seals that would activate her Kekai Genkai. Hey, it's Hinata. The Hyuga girl flinched in surprise and turned to find Yamanaka Ino running up to her with Haruno Sakura jogging behind her. You've got that Byakugan thing, right? Ino demanded as she reached Hinata's side. You can see really far, and through stuff, right? Why yes. Then you can find Sasuke-kun for us. Ino grinned. Ino. Sakura growled. Leave Sasuke-kun alone. The last thing that he needs right now is you stalking him. Relax, billboard brow, the blonde girl sniffed. I'm not going to pester him for a date this time. I want information. Sasuke-kun knew stuff about Naruto, and I'm sure he's found out more from Mrs. Uzumaki, and found out more about Mrs. Uzumaki, too. Don't tell me you're not curious about it because I know you'd be lying. Hinata looked back and forth between the two girls in confusion. She'd never really interacted with either girl outside of class activities. The way they'd fought each other over Uchiha Sasuke made them very intimidating. And their sudden interest in Naruto was bizarre. What? Okay, here's the scoop, Ino said with an excited glint in her blue eyes. So I spied Forward Girl and Sasuke-kun walking down the street outside my family's shop and crashed their moment before it could become a moment. Ino. Sakura hissed with a glower. And I dragged him off to find my dad so I could invite him over for dinner, and Sakura chased after us. Before I could get permission from Daddy, some crazy woman with long red hair interrupted us. She said a bunch of weird stuff and I guess that she's an old friend of my dad. And then she snatched Sasuke-kun away from us. When she was gone, Billboard Brow let me in on what she and Sasuke-kun had been talking about before I jumped in. Apparently, Sasuke-kun's father, the head of the Uchiha clan, stabbed Naruto because he thought that the dork was a werewolf. Hinata inhaled sharply, taken aback by the shocking and absurd statement. I know, Ino nodded excitedly. Crazy, right? Naruto's just a harmless loser. But Sasuke-kun was sure that his dad wouldn't do the deed if it wasn't true, and my dad thought so, too. And my dad said that the crazy lady who took him away is Naruto's mother. Huh? Hinata gasped. He's not an orphan. No, he isn't, Ino said, bouncing from foot to foot. Shocking, isn't it? So Naruto-san wasn't crazy when he said he was going to find his mother, Hinata murmured to herself, fidgeting furiously with her fingers as she stared down at the sidewalk. Huh? You didn't stutter. Ino remarked in shock. Hinata flinched. I said that out loud? What? When did Naruto say that? Sakura demanded. Did you see him recently? About an hour ago, maybe, Hinata squeaked. He seemed very confused, I thought. Where was he? Sakura asked. Sasuke-kun was sure that he was in protective custody after what happened. He ran into Kurenye-sensei's backyard, the Hyuga girl gulped, feeling crowded as the two other girls crowded closer. The way that he was acting, I thought that he'd hit his head. What happened? Ino pressed. Tell us everything. Well, he ran through the bushes and startled me so I hit him. Hinata swallowed hard and rubbed her sweaty palms on her pant legs. He didn't look right. His face it was different. He had fangs, and his whisker marks were darker, and his eyes, they were red and cat-like. Just like with the Kyuubi. Sakura whispered, looking very troubled. The what? Hinata wondered. Was he surrounded by a nasty cloak of bubbling red chakra? The pink-haired girl asked urgently. Hinata shook her head, no. Well, that's good, Sakura sighed in relief. I told him to end his jutsu, and he tried to, the timid girl hesitantly continued. But his ears got furry, and he grew a tail. What? Both Ino and Sakura squawked in near unison. A tail, Hinata repeated in a tiny voice. He'd have to be a werewolf, then, Ino mused. But, it's the middle of the day. There's no moon out right now. Is tonight the full moon? No, it's tomorrow night, Sakura frowned. Latent werewolves can change a bit under stress, but they don't grow tails. But he looked like a fox, Hinata weakly protested. Didn't he seem wolfish at all? A fox? Really? Ino tilted her head and brushed aside her bangs. Are you sure? Hinata nodded emphatically. Maybe the Kyuubi changed him, Sakura theorized. It gave him some of its power. Kitsune could change whenever they wanted to. So, now Naruto's a were fox instead of a werewolf. Is that possible? Ino asked. I don't know, Sakura answered helplessly. Huh. Ino flipped her bangs aside again and turned her gaze back to Hinata. So what else happened? What did Naruto tell you? Details. He was very upset. The Hyuga girl's index fingers pressed together, telegraphing her anxiety. He said that he needed to find his mother. He was scratched up, didn't have any shoes. I tried to bring him inside and calm him down, but that only upset him more. He was going to hit me, but an Umbunin came and took him away. Did you see where they went? Ino inquired. No, Hinata replied, swallowing hard. Too bad, Ino shrugged. It would have been nice to track him down to get a look at this fluffy tail he's supposed to have now. Ino pig. Sakura sputtered. Oh come on, Sakura. Ino grinned. Naruto might look cute in a weird way with a tail. Wouldn't you want to pet it and feel how soft it might be? And who knows what interesting information we could wring out of him. At that moment, Hinata really started to wonder if talking to Ino and Sakura about this was a good idea. They were chatty, nosy, and seemed shallow. If only she'd been able to find Kurenye-sensei before these girls had found her. Anyway, let's put your Byakugan to work, Ino declared, nudging Hinata with her elbow. Find Sasuke-kun and we should find Mrs. Uzumaki and then we can tell her that Naruto wants to see her, okay? Naruto-san's family name is Uzumaki, Hinata murmured as Ino sandwiched her between Sakura and herself. Yep, the Yamanaka girl nodded. Mrs. Uzumaki used to live in Konoha a long time ago, my dad said. And people used to call her the bloody Habanero, because on her first day in the village she beat the snot out of some bullies that tried to make fun of her. Hinata gulped in sudden dread. Don't worry, Sakura smiled kindly. She didn't seem all that dangerous, just a little bit eccentric. That doesn't make me feel much better. Kushina frowned when she slipped into the house and found no one, not even Naruto, waiting to meet her. The Umbu, Mangetsu, was definitely dodging her. What a coward. He was not the sort of man she wanted protecting her son, even if Naruto liked the guy. Closing the back door behind her, she headed for the kitchen table and put down the bag of meat buns that she'd brought over for lunch. Sitting on the table was a folded-up piece of paper. Kushina snatched it, unfolded it, and skimmed the brief note that it contained. Training ground number 15, 7 p.m., we'll talk Mangetsu. Her frown deepened. That's the field that I trashed, isn't it? No one will be there to overhear anything, then. But that's away from Naruto. I don't like that. She wanted Naruto to have some sort of say in the plans for the full moon. Once he was transformed, he couldn't talk, so it was important that the details of what would happen were discussed ahead of time. And since this was all for Naruto, he should know what would happen and be comfortable with it. Tucking the note into her pocket, she left lunch on the table and wandered over to the living room. Perhaps Naruto had fallen asleep on the couch while watching television. But all she found when she got there was a broken window sealed off with plastic. What the hell happened? Through the ceiling she heard the hurried thumping of running feet. Moments later she heard the footsteps coming down the stairs. And before she could turn around all the way there was a boy clinging to her middle. Hey, there, she greeted, swapping her scowl for a smile. Why's your hair wet? Naruto's hair was damp and a towel hung off his shoulders. He was shirtless, wearing only a pair of navy blue sweatpants. And his ears were furry and a foxtail hung over the waistband of his pants. Naruto, is something wrong? She asked, rubbing one of his furry black ears. I washed my hair because it smelled, her son mumbled into her shirt. Are you all right? Kushina pressed, using the towel to reduce the dampness of his hair. Did you bring lunch? Naruto asked, ignoring her question. Yes, she nodded, reluctantly letting go of her question for the time being. It's in the kitchen. Cool. Naruto exclaimed and dragged her by the arm back to the food. As her son tore into a pork bun she noted that he had far fewer bandages. Now there were just 2 squares of gauze taped to his left shoulder and right side. In no time at all, there would be no bandages left on her baby. The sooner the better. How's your day been? Naruto asked between mouthfuls of food. Kushina flashed him a suspicious look before selecting a meat bun and giving him a rundown of her day. She told him what she had for breakfast and how much she enjoyed it. Then she detailed the spots she'd visited and the people she'd talked to. When she got to her meeting with the old Inoshikacho and the appearance of Inoichi's girl spawn along with the exiled Uchiha, Naruto finally looked really interested. Sasuke got cast out. Her son blinked, pausing in the consumption of his second bun. What for? That mark that Orochimaru gave him, Kushina replied. But he didn't ask for it or want it, Naruto frowned. It doesn't matter to the Uchiha clan, she shrugged. He's tainted and they don't tolerate taint in their perfect little world, so out he goes. Well, that just sucks, Naruto muttered, flattening his ears. Indeed, she agreed. Now are you going to spill about the ears and tail? No, he muttered stubbornly. To try and kill the subject he closed his eyes, concentrated, and his ears shrank and unfurried themselves back into round, wrinkled human ears. and underneath the table she imagined that his tail was shrinking back up into his spine. There, all gone. Fine, be that way, she grumbled, poking out her tongue at him. You fuzzy little brat. If you ever feel like talking about what's bothering you, I'll listen whenever you need me to. Yeah, Naruto grunted and bit into his lunch with more human teeth and renewed vigor. I was thinking that after you get sprung loose from this place, we'd go out for dinner with Sasuke and his mother, Kushina remarked as she polished off her last meat bun. Her son squeaked, looking a bit panicked. Relax, Mikoto's an old friend of mine, and if I had any suspicion that she had anything at all to do with what Fugaku did, I wouldn't have accepted her invitation, she snorted. If things had worked out differently and you were born here, I bet Sasuke would have been your best buddy. Ew. Naruto grimaced. Sasuke is a jerk. Maybe if he'd had you as a friend from the beginning he wouldn't be a jerk, she suggested. Her son's expression told her that he did not agree. Not long after that they finished lunch, threw the bag and wrappers into the garbage, and relocated to the living room couch. When she sat down, he laid his head against her legs so that she could stroke his spiky yellow hair. He claimed that nothing was bothering him, and yet little actions like these contradicted him. But prying hadn't worked so far, and she was inclined to let things slide a little longer in favor of playing with his hair. It reminded her of Minato, and it was only made worse by the scent in the air that was so similar to his smell that it raised the hairs on the back of her neck if she paid too much attention to it. Mom, Naruto mumbled drowsily. Did he want me? Did who want you, Naru-chan? She asked, digging the TV remote out from between two Seiyushians with her free hand. Dad, he explained, forcing out the word. Before I was born, did he want me? Of course he did, she told him. He was really worried when he found out that I was pregnant. He was afraid that you would catch his curse somehow, or that he'd be a bad father since he really didn't know much about his own natural father. But whenever he'd shove his worries away and forget about them for a while, he'd get so excited. I'd lay on the bed and he'd talk to you in my belly, he'd ask me how much longer, and then he'd go and complain that it was too long. She paused to rub at her misting eyes and swallow the rising lump in her throat. He wanted to see you be born and hold you in his arms more than anything. Naruto didn't reply. He just snuggled deeper into her lap, curled up so that she couldn't really see his face. And after a little while his breathing evened out as he drifted off into a nap. I do believe we're making progress, she thought with a little smile. After the full moon, I should be able to start feeding him some hero stories. Even if he only admires Minato a little bit, I'll be satisfied. Now, she thought, her mood going a bit grim. I just have to worry about this Mangetsu character. If he fails to impress me, he will find out why people in these parts compare me to a spicy hot pepper. Chapter 39, Flashbang. Sasuke wasn't sure how long he stayed up in the tree. But when he finally decided to drop down to the ground, he wasn't alone for long. Mere seconds after he settled on a direction to wander in search of lunch, two of his most devoted stalkers came around a bend in the park path. Sasuke-kun. Ino waved cheerfully, earning her a glare from Sakura, who was just a few steps behind. Didn't I just get away from them? He wondered glumly. You're so hard to find. The blonde girl complained. If Hinata didn't have awesome eyes we would never have found you. I think I need to beat this Hinata person up, he mused. Where did Mrs. Uzumaki go? Sakura asked, still burdened down by some library books. How should I know? Sasuke grunted. He was in no hurry to see Naruto's mother again. Even though she had told him that she wasn't angry at him as he hadn't conspired to do Naruto harm, he feared she wouldn't be happy when she found out that he had told his father about her picture, which might have set his father on the path that he took. He glowered at the two girls, hoping that maybe they'd finally get a clue and leave him alone. Well, she left with you, Ino pointed out. Where did she go? I don't know, Sasuke grumbled. I didn't ask. Darn, Ino frowned. Hinata saw Naruto and something was wrong with him, Sakura explained, adjusting her hold on her books. We wanted to tell her about it. Sasuke frowned, and then he noticed a third person. She stood several feet behind Ino and Sakura and was doing an odd fidgety sort of thing with her index fingers. At least, he thought that she was a girl. Her short hairstyle, lowered face, stooped posture, her name, and loose gender-neutral clothing didn't give much hint as to her sex. What was wrong with him? Sasuke asked slowly. He was upset, he wanted to see his mother, and he was starting to turn into a fox, Ino summarized for him. What? Sasuke asked flatly. He was turning into a fox. He's supposed to be a werewolf. Father wouldn't have stabbed him if silver hadn't burned him. That's why we want to find her, Sakura said. So are you sure you don't know where she was going? Ino pressed. Just a direction, so Hinata can start looking. I don't know if I'd be able to find her, Hinata mumbled so softly that Sasuke barely heard her. I've never met her. Things look different with the Byakugan. So she's a Hyuga, Sasuke noted. With her face turned towards the ground, he hadn't gotten a look at her eyes. There was a Hyuga in my class, wasn't there? She's got long red hair, I'm sure that it'll still stick out, Ino said dismissively. But. Hinata. They all stopped and turned to see a woman with ivory skin, wavy black hair, and red eyes coming down the path from the opposite direction. She was walking with a man who had a neatly trimmed beard growing along his jawline and a few cigarettes peeking out of his shirt pocket. Both wore civilian clothes. She had on a sundress and he was dressed in slacks and a button-up shirt and walked together hand in hand. But as soon as they were spotted, the man dropped her hand. Kukuranye-sensei, Hinata squeaked in relief. Is everything all right? The woman asked, picking up on the girl's anxiety. Can I talk to you? The Hyuga girl almost pleaded. Of course, her sensei smiled and gently guided the girl off the path and behind some bushes so that they could speak in private. Hey, there, Asuma-sensei, Ino said to the man with an almost predatory gleam in her eyes. On a date. Ino, the man grunted warningly, looking profoundly uncomfortable. If you ever need flowers, come to me, the girl grinned and winked. Asuma sighed and removed one of the cigarettes from his shirt pocket, a lighter from his pants pocket, and then lit it. Sasuke had no interest in who was dating who and took advantage of the situation to think things over, things that had been stewing in his brain for days. The picture of Naruto's mother that he'd told his father about had been important. He remembered how the expression on his father's face had changed when he'd heard about it. Something about knowing the identity of Naruto's mother had been crucial to his father, and although there was nothing to prove it, he felt that it somehow tied into his father uncovering Naruto's werewolf status. Family ties shouldn't have anything to do with lycanthropy. Naruto's mother wasn't a werewolf, there would be a huge uproar accompanying her arrival if that was the case. His mother wouldn't be friends with the woman if she was a werewolf. So if the mother wasn't the direct clue, what about the father? He thought about the Konoha werewolves he'd researched. With his expulsion from the Uchiha clan, he hadn't thought much on that, too caught up with his own problems. Now he remembered the werewolf that had stuck out most to him, the one that had looked sort of like Naruto. Namikaze Minato. I miss Minato. He could make you behave. Did he die? No. Worse. A howler took him. Sasuke chewed at the inside of his cheek in thought. So, if the werewolf, Namikaze Minato, is his father, Fugaku-sama would know about him because his girlfriend is mother's friend, and he would know they were going to have a baby. With a werewolf father, maybe, Naruto caught the curse without a bite. Perhaps that's what Fugaku-sama thought when he heard about that picture. It could explain Naruto's dislike of fathers that he'd expressed early on in the Forest of Death. If Naruto became a werewolf because of his father and not from a bite, surely he would be angry with the man. And since Namikaze's ultimate fate was unknown, there would be some abandonment. Wait, he grew a tail? Kurenye-sensei exclaimed from her position hidden by the bushes. Asuma-sensei grunted as he exhaled a cloud of cigarette smoke. What's going on? Hinata said that she saw Naruto turning into a fox, Ino explained helpfully. The man almost dropped his cigarette. What? Sasuke half listened as Ino happily spilled all of what she knew of Hinata's story to her smoking sensei. There's no doubt that Naruto's a werewolf, but what's with him turning into a fox? Kabuto frowned as Kimimaro left his apartment after an early evening visit. Orochimaru's protege and the acting sensei for Doso's team had developed a cough that was really starting to bother him. He'd come to Kabuto for treatment, but the spy was worried with what he'd found. My medical jutsu barely healed any of the damage I found in his heart and lungs, he mused, removing his round glasses to polish them. It's not any normal infection. Could it be a side effect from the curse mark upgrade? Orochimaru had only recently developed the second level to his curse mark, giving the recipient an altered form and even greater power. So far none of those whose curse marks had been enhanced had reported any significant negative effects, and there had been no reported fatalities. But perhaps they were just taking longer to show up. I need to make note of this in my next report, he decided. It could become a serious problem down the road. And if Kimimaro can't shake this off, steps need to be taken to preserve his bloodline. A soft rustling at his window caught his attention. Replacing his glasses, he spied a snake slithering through the crack he always left in his window. It was small and ordinary looking at first glance, but the unusual pattern of clustered comma marks on its scales revealed it to be one of Orochimaru's summons. Kabuto walked over to his window and allowed the demon reptile to slither up his arm and coil around his neck. It quietly hissed some instructions into his ear and then coughed up a tiny pill bottle into his hand. The Konoha genin thanked the creature, relayed to it his thoughts on Kimimaro from a few moments before, and eased it back out his window. Interesting, the medic thought, gently rattling the little glass bottle so that he could hear the single pill inside. Very interesting. I'll need to prepare some drugs. Even disowned, an Uchiha is still an Uchiha. Naruto pushed his chicken and vegetable stir-fry around on his plate with his chopsticks and sighed. It was late, almost 6:30, and there was nothing wrong with dinner. But his stomach kept twisting and knotting and it felt hard to eat. Are you all right? The boy peered up from his plate to see Mangetsu Minato, his father, whatever, sitting across the table from him. The man didn't wear his wolf mask anymore, there wasn't much point. He looked concerned and Naruto made a face. I'm fine. The boy insisted, and to prove it he gobbled down several big bites of rice, chicken, and cooked vegetables. See. Okay, the Umbu nodded slowly, leaning back in his chair. If it bothers you for me to be here, I'll wait in the living room for you to finish eating. Naruto ignored him and shoveled his dinner down. He was going to show this confusing man that he wasn't bothered. He could eat just fine with the man's gaze weighing down on him. It didn't get under his skin at all. Done. He announced, tossing down his chopsticks after he'd cleared off his plate. No problem. The man chuckled a bit and took his dirty dishes to the sink to be washed. Naruto laid his cheek on the cleared table and watched the man's back. They hadn't really spoken since just before lunch. The boy really didn't know what he thought of him anymore. I've waited a very long time to meet you, Naruto. Why wouldn't I be happy? He wanted to see you be born and hold you in his arms more than anything. He peeled his face off the table, slid off his seat, and wandered out of the kitchen and into the living room. After making himself comfortable on the lumpy old couch, Naruto let his eyes wander. Eventually they landed on the collection of unmarked cardboard boxes and he frowned. Why the heck is all that stuff in boxes? I never got around to unpacking it, the man replied as he strolled into the living room and leaned against the far wall. Members of Umbu are always on call, so I only unpacked things that I needed, like plates. Naruto flinched a bit in surprise and glared over the back of the couch at him for a moment before coming up with a question. Everybody says that werewolves go nuts when they change with the moon. How come you didn't? I was lucky, he said. When it happened, I was in a situation where there was no time to think or be horrified at what was happening to me. I had to focus or I was going to die. And there were people close by that were important to me that reminded me what my name was. His eyes grew distant. I ran then because I was afraid that I would hurt them. Perhaps I shouldn't have run. So all the rest go nuts, Naruto muttered. It depends on what the person knows when the change happens, the man replied. If they believe what most of the world believes about werewolves, they'll most likely go mad. With no hope that they will survive and no way to stop the change, the human mind breaks and there's nothing left but animal instincts agitated by fear. But if they know that they will be alright and are prepared for what they will experience, they will be fine. The human mind will stay in control and sane. And when the sun comes up and breaks the spell of the full moon, the human mind can bring the human body back. Naruto rested his chin on the back of the couch and turned the information over in his mind. I guess, that makes sense. He remembered how sometimes when he got very upset he wouldn't just start looking like an animal, he'd start acting kind of like one. There were times in some of the other foster homes when he'd be out for the full moon and dogs would chase him, or hunters would fire arrows at him. He'd panic and his memories would get fuzzy or go blank, and when he calmed down he'd be lost, not having remembered where he'd run, and he'd spend hours, one time, it had take 2 days, trying to find his way back home. And most recently there was his freak out that morning he barely recalled hurling himself through the window, or splashing into some neighbor's koi pond, or raising his hand to rip off Hinata's face. Oh shit. Naruto swallowed hard and turned around on the couch so that he was facing the television set and hunched forward, wrapping his arms around his stomach. I can't. Did I hurt Hinata? I can't remember. He really didn't know her well at all, but she seemed nice, harmless. It was hard to believe that she was a demon-hunting ninja. She didn't look like she could hurt a fly. A timid little girl like her didn't deserve to have been bullied by that jerk who was supposed to be her cousin. It reminded Naruto of himself and his older cousins, only she hadn't made any protest while he'd always done something, even if it had just been to wail for his mother so that she could yell at them. And she certainly didn't deserve claws to the face when it seemed like all she'd done to him was try to help. You know that girl? The man commented. No, you didn't hurt her. I stopped you and removed you from the situation before you could. A cool wave of relief rushing through the boy's veins and he flopped back against the couch back. Thanks, he muttered in a small voice. You're welcome, the Umbunin replied. And then he sighed. I should get going. You're leaving again? Naruto asked, again turning around on the couch to peek over the back at the man. Well, your little run interrupted a meeting that I was arranging, so I had to push it back to later, he explained with a little shrug as he pulled his gloves and forearm armor, which had been removed to wash dishes, back on. Oh. Naruto wasn't worried. He was well hidden, and if anything did happen his protector would be back in minutes. Nevertheless, a tiny knot kinked up in the pit of his stomach. I shouldn't be gone more than a few hours, the man continued, leaving his right glove off. But just in case. He bit his right thumb and drew blood. I probably should have done this the first time. Kuchi Yasei no Jutsu. With a few quick hand seals, he slammed the blooded hand on the floor, creating a brief seal web almost instantly obscured by a cloud of white smoke. When the smoke cleared, there was a cat-sized toad crouching there. It was purplish with a black cape, and there was a collection of warts around its head and shoulders that made him think of an old lady's overly curly hair. That sort of looks like the green toad that Ero Sennin had when I first saw him, only purple, and sorta girly. Ha! Minato-chan. The toad croaked, sounding like an old grandmother. I heard rumors that you were back. She hopped up onto his shoulder and pinched his cheek with a partially webbed hand. How are you, sweetie? I'm well, he smiled. I was hoping that I could ask you a favor, Shima-sama. Combat or non-combat? The lady toad asked. It should be non-combat. He shifted his gaze over to Naruto on the couch. You won't give her any trouble, will you, Naruto? No, the boy mumbled, shaking his head. I'm going to be babysat by a toad demon? Oh. The purple toad blinked a few times at him, then leapt the distance between the Umbu's shoulder and the couch with complete ease. What a cute little boy. You want me to watch him, Minato-chan? Yes, please, the man nodded with a polite smile as he pulled his other glove on. The Uchiha have been picking on him, but they don't know that he's here, so there shouldn't be any problem. Don't call out the search party unless I'm gone more than 3 hours. Got it. The toad demon winked. Run along now, I know how to mind little ones. Thank you very much, Shima-sama, the Umbu bowed, put on his mask, and vanished into thin air. Shima-sama? Naruto wondered as he eyed the lady toad demon. Is she important or something? A pair of cold, slippery hands grasped Naruto's hair and Naruto yelped as the purple toad rubbed his head. Just like Minato-chan's hair, Shima croaked gleefully. So soft and springy and yellow. Hey! Naruto protested. Sorry, couldn't help myself, the woman toad chuckled. Human hair is so fascinating. Anyway, would you like a snack? Where do you keep the bugs? The bugs. He repeated blankly. She's not seriously going to feed me bugs, is she? Yeah, the bugs, the purple toad nodded with a twinkle in her odd squashed pupils. Nice lean protein. Nothing better for ya. She is serious. Naruto gulped, feeling vaguely queasy. Dad, you suck. Kushina grimaced as she picked her way to the center of the training ground that she'd demolished several days before. It was mostly repaired, but it had to lay fallow for almost a month to let it completely recover. It was 1 minute away from the specified meeting time and the sun was close to setting, leaving very long, deep shadows. When she reached the middle of the grounds marked with a very large boulder, she leaned against the rock and scanned the surrounding trees for white armor. Where are you, Mangetsu? Her grimace deepened into a scowl. Mangetsu, what sort of Umbu code name is that, anyway? Umbu are almost always named after some kind of animal or even demon. They're almost never named after non-living things, and full moon is definitely a non-living thing. I mean, there's that ancient human myth about the father of all demons, the ten-tailed beast, being entombed in the moon by a mage, the sage of 6 paths who ascended into godhood, but then why not just call him Juabi? Her scowl lightened slightly into a thoughtful frown. I wonder what those kids wanted. As she'd finished up her dinner, she noticed Sasuke, Ino, and the pink-haired girl from earlier. When they'd spotted her, they made a beeline for her and had wanted to talk. But Kushina had to brush them off, citing this meeting. She'd promised to find them later and then ditched them before they could follow her to this stupid rendezvous. She pulled out a little pocket watch. Wristwatches didn't last long on ninja wrists, to check the time, and her patience abruptly ended when it indicated that it was exactly 7 p.m. Okay, she called out. You have 5 minutes to show yourself before I go to the Hokage and complain about you. There's no need to shout. I'm here. That voice. Kushina stiffened, then very slowly turned her head to look up at the top of the boulder that she was leaning against. A fully suited Umbu squatted there, staring down at her from a canine mask. The ceramic mask was detailed in black with a crescent moon shape on the brow, and it was framed by a spiky mane of yellow hair. That hair. She inhaled deeply. There wasn't much air movement, but there was enough, and he was close enough that she could smell him clearly. The scent was one that had been branded into her memory years ago. It was like fragrant leaves and fresh wind with a hint of cooking spices and sunshine, and it had always made her feel warm and happy. That scent. Only one man smelled like that. Only one man had hair like that. Only one man had such a smooth, low voice. Only one man fit. Minato. But it couldn't be. He was gone forever. This was a lie. Her Minato didn't exist anymore. She couldn't seem to catch her breath. Her feet stumbled as she staggered away. She tried to burst the genjutsu that she had to be trapped in, but nothing appeared to change. Kushina. The imposter asked and dropped down from the rock. Are you okay? Fugaku? Her mind raced. No, he's still in prison. And no other Uchiha would screw with me this way. Kashoku, however, was still roaming around the village. He was a kitsune. With enough effort he could transform himself into a perfect copy, all the way down to his scent. All Kashoku would need were pictures, vital information, height, weight, a video or audio clip to hear his voice, and a scrap of clothing or possession that still retained his smell. Kushina. There wasn't even a yard between them, and he removed his mask. At the sight of Minato's perfectly mimicked face, something inside of her snapped. With a raw scream she lunged at him, only to miss. Her fists sailed through empty air and almost slammed into the boulder that had been behind him. Hiration, was her first thought. But that wasn't possible. This fake just had to be fast. So she attacked again and again. She launched jets of water and all the weapons she had on her person. She even brought out her special chakra chains. If she could ensnare him, she could suppress his chakra, even if he was stronger than she was, and leave him at her mercy. But he always slipped out of her grasp before the spines on the links of the chains could catch into his skin. Hold still. She shrieked in frustration after yet another miss. I'd rather not, the phony replied from somewhere behind her. Please clam down or at least stop trying to kill me so that we can talk like you wanted. Instead of responding verbally, she spun around and tried to hook him with her chains again. It had to be Koshoku. He was trying to confuse her, make her think that she was going insane. The weasel in Fox's skin and human's skin had plenty of motive and the ability to pull this con off. She kept on the offensive. The nearly repaired training ground was ruined again, probably even worse than last time. And her chakra stores were rapidly being depleted. If she didn't catch the bastard quick or run, she'd be exhausted and at his mercy. When a chain attack failed to extend the distance that she needed it to, she knew it was time to cut and run. Gathering one last burst of chakra, she set off a watery explosion with herself at the epicenter. As the destructive waves that she'd created rippled outwards, she sprinted from the field. Kushina had no destination in mind. All that she knew was that she had to get away. She had to find her way out of this waking nightmare. And after she had recovered her strength in a day or two, she'd track Koshoku down and tear him limb from limb for impersonating her Minato. Her lungs burned. Her legs ached. There was a ringing in her ears. The world outside of her body felt far away, fuzzy. Her thoughts and feelings were so muddled that only the most basic, instinctual thoughts rose out of the turmoil. Run. Run away. Run hard. Get away from the fake. And make him pay. When his legs gave out, she had no idea where she was. She just sat on the sidewalk with her legs half tucked underneath her and gasped for air. Her long red hair stuck to the back of her sweaty neck and hung in front of her eyes as she bowed her head. Stupid hair. If only Minato hadn't loved it so. I should have cut it. Kushina. She jerked up her head, but it wasn't the voice of the imposter. Uchiha Mikoto stood frozen at the gateway between Konoha and the exclusive Uchiha district. Either she'd just returned from a walk, or was just going on one. Her old friend stood there for a moment and then walked towards her, kneeling down to be at eye level. Kushina, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Yeah, Kushina wheezed dazedly. I tried to beat the shit out of him, too. But I missed. Mikoto gave her a very worried look before taking her arm. Come on, the Uchiha murmured. I'll walk you back to your accommodations. Minato swore profusely in the privacy of his own mind. Most of the words he used he'd learned from Kushina. Things were just not going his way. Kushina's explosive reaction had been half expected and thoroughly dreaded. But he hadn't thought that she would run when she got tired. He'd hoped that after she exhausted herself they could talk and make some sort of agreement over what was going to happen on the full moon. He'd tried to catch her as she ran, but her final water jutsu had obscured which direction she'd bolted in, and that she'd even bolted at all. When he picked up her trail, she was running along populated streets. If he was seen grabbing her and dragging her off against her will, there would be rumors. In the current village climate, sparked by the Uchiha's misbehavior, it could start a small panic. And when she reached a relatively deserted area, she was yards away from the Uchiha district. Uchiha Mikoto spotted her, recognized her, and moved in. Mikoto was Kushina's friend, and seeing the Uchiha gently lead the exhausted, frazzled woman towards the busy heart of the village where her hotel was located, he relaxed. Mikoto won't do anything. But he still tailed them by rooftop until the two women disappeared into the correct hotel. He didn't want to deal with Mikoto right now, even if she was friendly. Kushina would probably spill everything to her, so the Uchiha clan would get plenty of warning that he was around. He let the two women have their space. Kushina needs time, he decided. My appearance was too shocking. She's too angry at me to be rational. Maybe tomorrow. But he glowered up at the nearly full moon that was starting to be visible in the rapidly darkening sky. He knew that he didn't have time. The full moon was tomorrow night. He didn't have the time for her to get her mind around his return as a human. With a grimace, he warped himself directly to his bathroom. Although Kushina hadn't landed a direct hit on him, he hadn't escaped her tantrum unscathed. He was covered in scratches and scrapes and bruises from glancing blows and debris. His left arm was peppered with splinters from when a water jet slammed into a nearby tree trunk and exploded the bark. And his right ankle was bothering him a bit after a hard landing. Why is it, he wondered as he pulled out the first aid kit, that after every long separation, she greets me with violence. "Ah, you're back." Shima greeted him, clinging to the door frame to be at his eye level. "Everything all right?" "Yeah, just a little scuffle," he grinned. "Nothing serious enough for a hospital visit." "Any problems?" "Nope," the purple toad replied. "It's been quiet. Naruto-chan and I tried to play chess, but he's no good. He's only just started learning," Minato shrugged. "Thank you for watching him for me." "It's no trouble," she smiled. "Good night." And with a puff of smoke, she returned home to her husband in the realm of the toad demons. Minato sighed and focused on picking out the wooden shrapnel from his arm with a pair of tweezers. But he wasn't alone for long. "What happened to you?" "Your mother," he replied, catching sight of Naruto peeking into the bathroom from the corner of his eye, "was not happy to see me." "Really?" Naruto grumbled disbelievingly. "Why not? She always says how awesome you were, and stuff." "Yes, by telling you nothing but a list of my most embarrassing moments," Minato mentally snorted as he used water from the sink to wash off his injuries. "Getting punched in the face, having paint spill on my head minutes before I'm supposed to meet with a client, that noodle incident, and always being the sober friend and suffering the not-sober friend's antics. Yeah, that's awesome." "She tried to feed me bugs," Naruto announced darkly. "Sorry about that," Minato sighed. "I forgot to mention that we'd already had dinner." "Did she find any insects to feed you?" "She wanted to go cockroach hunting, but I talked her into chess instead." "Good deflection," Minato muttered as he rubbed some medicinal cream into his scrapes. "Did you win any games?" "Nope," Naruto pouted. "Did Mom really beat you up?" "No, she missed," he chuckled. "These are all just close calls. So, she won't be coming to see me for the full moon. If she calms down and decides that she wants to come, I'll arrange for someone in Umbu to escort her to where we'll be," Minato replied and put away the first aid kit, satisfied. Aside from getting out the splinters, he really didn't have to worry about the damage. If it didn't heal overnight while he slept, it would heal up completely during his upcoming shift. So he shucked off his Umbu armor, leaving only the black bodysuit on and hobbled out of the bathroom and towards his bedroom. "Where we will be going?" Naruto asked uncertainly, peeking into Minato's room just as he'd peeking into the bathroom. "To a small Umbu outpost about half a day's walk from the village," he answered, dumping his armor into a corner before digging into a box for something to sleep in. "There shouldn't be anyone around, and if there are they'll be Umbu and expecting us." "Okay," Naruto mumbled. Minato started changing into a loose t-shirt and sleep pants. Watching Naruto out of the corner of his vision, he noticed the boy's eyes widening when he peeled his shirt off. The boy had to have seen his old bite scar on his shoulder. "Did it hurt?" his son whispered. "Yes," Minato nodded slowly, rubbing at the old scar and remembering that awful night and the screams and the fear and all of that blood. "Yes, it did." Naruto hesitated, like he was going to say more, then slunk away without another word. Minato watched him go and then finished changing so that he could limp down to the kitchen. It's too late for coffee and alcohol is out of the question, but some calming tea would be fantastic. That's it for part 13. Thank you for watching and see you on the next video.